Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the fascinating, sometimes bizarre and always quirky world of medieval jobs. You might want to get comfortable because you'll probably wish you could have just spent your days lounging by the fire rather than working in one of these odd professions. It's a time before coffee breaks, air conditioning, or even the luxury of a comfy chair. Life in the medieval era was full of strange, essential, and downright strange occupations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. By the way, I'd love to know where you're joining me from. Go ahead and comment your location and local time so we can all feel just a little more connected across time and space. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up just as the warm glow of the setting sun touches the wooden beams of your little home. Outside, the sounds of bustling streets and market chatter fill the air, and the soft rustling of hay reminds you that the world around you is quite busy indeed. The medieval world, as you will quickly realise, is both harsh and oddly charming. A world where nothing is quite as it seems. There's no cell phone to check or email to send, but there's plenty to do. People are surviving, working and thriving in ways that seem entirely foreign to us today. However, you've got an appointment to keep. Your job, though odd by modern standards, is absolutely necessary. Welcome to a world full of peculiar jobs that would make you think twice about calling in sick tomorrow. For today's journey, let's start with one of the oddest yet strangely important positions of all in the medieval world, the role of the professional puke taster. Imagine this, your job isn't just to try food, you're there to check if a meal is poisoned. Yes, you heard that right. Now you're probably thinking, no thanks, I'll pass on that job. And honestly, you're right to. The job of a puke taster isn't as glamorous as it sounds, but it was necessary. If anyone would want to harm a king or a wealthy noble, poisoning their food would be an easy way to do it. So your role as a food taster is more than just gourmet expert. You're the living insurance policy, the ultimate, if unappetizing, act of service. But first, let's get a better feel for how you ended up in this position. You're standing in the grand hall of a great medieval castle. The scents of roasted meats, spices, and sweet fruits fill the air. It's a vibrant scene with the sounds of music and chatter echoing off the stone walls. The king himself, seated at the grand feast table, looks over at you with an appraising glance. The entire hall quiets as he gestures for you to step forward. This isn't just any meal, it's the king's feast, and you've been chosen to ensure it's safe. No pressure, right? Your heart skips a beat, not because you're nervous about the king noticing your presence, but because, well, this job comes with its own set of dangers. There's a certain fear that you might taste something that wasn't meant for you. After all, the last thing you want is to be the victim of someone else's malicious plot. But here's the thing, you're not the only one doing this job. In fact, throughout medieval Europe, the role of the puke taster was fairly common in royal courts. From kings to bishops, many of the upper class lived in constant fear of poisoning, so someone had to risk it for them. Your job wasn't just to sample food. You were there to make sure that what the nobles were eating was free from any toxins or substances that might kill them. Though many royal courts had dedicated tasters, the most famous or infamous examples of these jobs come from the 15th and 16th centuries. Think about it. You're standing there with a fork in hand, wondering whether it's your last bite. You take a deep breath, clear your throat, hoping the pressure won't cause you to choke on the food, and take a bite of a roast duck or a heavy wine. Then the wait begins. How long will it take for you to feel sick? Will you drop dead in the middle of the grand hall? There's no time to waste. But here's the catch. Sometimes these tasters wouldn't taste everything. Wine, for example, could be tested by servants or trusted attendants. Sometimes it was the king's personal bodyguard, and not a court official, who would take the first sip of the wine goblet. No one was taking any chances. There's an odd kind of relief in this job too, right? At least for the taster, there's some guarantee of safety. If the food is poisoned, they'll likely be the first to go. And if the king survives, well, it's just another day in the royal court. But what was life like for the average taster in these roles? Some of them, perhaps a little naive, might have thought that it was an easy job. They probably were enjoying the food, no doubt. But this didn't come without its risks. You know, a lot of medieval royal meals were far from being the healthiest. There were no proper kitchens, no modern hygienic practices, and food was often prepared without a clear understanding of nutrition or food safety. That means you might end up testing a dish that, instead of being carefully prepared with fresh ingredients, is full of rotten meat or, perhaps even worse, fermented goods that could make you sick just from the smell. Historians still wonder if any of these tasters ever actually succeeded in preventing a poisoning, or if their role was more of a symbolic act, a way to ease the minds of royalty, giving them a sense of security. After all, it's hard to know how much real danger these tasters were in. Were they in constant peril, or was the job just a formality to make the nobles feel safe? As your mind wanders and you feel the weight of the role you're playing in the grand medieval court, there's a sudden chuckle from the royal table. The king takes a sip of his wine, nodding approvingly, signalling the feast to continue. His face is still an expression of absolute confidence, oblivious to the real drama that could have unfolded had you failed at your job. At least for today, your role is over. You're done tasting, but your work has just begun. It's a strange feeling knowing you've just saved a life and yet your job never ends. Tomorrow, the same task awaits you again. You find yourself leaving the royal hall, stepping out into the cool evening air of the castle courtyard. The hum of activity lingers in the background as servants and guards bustle about, preparing for another long night. The rich aroma of roasting meat still hangs in the air, a reminder of your unsettling job. As you walk down the cobbled path, the chill of the stone beneath your feet contrasts with the warmth of the day's events. You've just survived another evening of uncertainty, another round of tasting, and you couldn't help but wonder if you'd be called again tomorrow. But as strange as this role may seem, it's not the only odd job around the castle. The medieval world is filled with peculiar, even quirky occupations, many of which you probably wouldn't have guessed could exist. After all, life in these times wasn't exactly filled with the modern comforts we enjoy today. There were no bustling coffee shops to provide that caffeine pick-me-up, no fast food delivery service when you just couldn't muster the energy to cook. No, in the medieval world, survival meant you had to rely on your wits, and sometimes just the right odd job. One such occupation, no less strange, is that of the chambermaid. Now, you might be thinking of the chambermaids you've read about in more modern history, but trust me, this wasn't a cushy, well-paying role where you simply tidy up a few rooms. No, a medieval chambermaid's job was far more complex and downright bizarre at times. The first thing to understand is that the job of a chambermaid was not solely about fluffing pillows and straightening bedsheets. Far from it. A chambermaid in the royal household was, in fact, the first line of defence against any kind of cleanliness crisis, and this wasn't just about dusting the furniture or making sure the rooms looked presentable. It went much deeper than that. Imagine the lavishness of the king's private chamber. An extravagant four-poster bed draped in rich tapestries, delicate candles casting their soft light on gold-embellished furniture, and thick rugs covering the cold stone floor. It sounds like a dream, doesn't it? But in reality, these rooms were a hotbed of filth and discomfort. There was no indoor plumbing, no water running easily from taps, and hygiene was, let's say, a bit sketchy. Your role as a chambermaid would be to oversee this environment, ensuring it remained as livable as possible. This meant you would often have to deal with the messiest of circumstances. Royalty, in all their luxury, still struggled with the same basic needs we all do, although the task was far more complicated in their world. For instance, chambermaids were often tasked with the cleaning and maintenance of something called the privy chamber. This room, usually located within the royal living quarters, was meant for very private business. And by that, I mean business of the kind that doesn't get talked about at dinner parties. The royal household could not avoid the messier realities of human nature, so the chambermaids would need to dispose of waste, make sure no smells lingered, and even ensure that there was adequate ventilation. Yes, these servants were tasked with something that would make most people squirm. Clearing the air, quite literally, in more ways than one. Beyond this, chambermaids were responsible for changing the bed linens, and not just a light fluff and fold. Medieval beds were often covered in thick layers of blankets and animal furs. They were designed to keep the royal family warm, yes, but in a world without modern washing machines, these blankets could easily become a breeding ground for lice, fleas, and other creepy crawlies. You can only imagine what it must have been like to change these filthy coverings day after day, all while maintaining the dignity of your station. It's not just about fresh sheets, it's about making sure nothing too terrible comes to light when the king or queen retreats for a restful night. You probably wouldn't survive this job, not because of the physical demands, but because of the endless, thankless labour. And yet, for these chambermaids, their work was essential. They ensured the royal family remained comfortable, their dignity intact even when dealing with the most unglamorous of duties. But there's more to a chambermaid's role than just cleaning. chambermaids had to be incredibly discreet, almost like secret keepers for the royal household. Any slip-up, any whispered conversation overheard could result in serious consequences. You might overhear a scandalous affair, a heated argument, or something more troubling, like plans to usurp the throne. No matter what, the chambermaids' ears were meant to remain sealed. They had a delicate balance to maintain, keeping the royal family's chambers pristine while making sure the secrets of the day stayed behind closed doors. Historians still wonder if any of these chambermaids ever witnessed something truly groundbreaking, some royal secret so potent it could have changed the course of history. What if they overheard a betrayal or uncovered a plot that could have altered the monarchy forever? It's easy to forget just how powerful the quiet jobs were in these courts. While the royal courtiers and noblemen were out making decisions, it was the chambermaids who saw it all, heard it all, and yet they were bound by the same invisible chains as those they served. But one of the strangest tasks a chambermaid could face was when she had to clean the royal bedchamber after a night of, well, royal activity. Let's be honest here. Medieval courts weren't exactly the cleanest places. Royal bedrooms could become a bit unkempt. That means cleaning up after the king or queen's romantic escapades. Perhaps you could call it the medieval equivalent of dealing with someone else's morning after, minus the modern cleaning products, of course. It's hard to imagine surviving that level of exposure to a royal family's most intimate moments, but there was no escaping it. As a chambermaid, you had to be prepared to face whatever the day, or night, might throw at you. This was a life of constant motion, and a very peculiar set of responsibilities. Imagine the conversation you'd have if someone asked you, "What did you do today?" And your answer is, "Well, I cleaned up after the king's date night. You know, business as usual." That's the world you're stepping into, one where your job may not seem glamorous, but it's indispensable to the functioning of the entire court. The cool evening breeze tugs gently at your cloak as you leave the dimly lit castle behind. The sounds of laughter and music fade into the distance as you make your way toward your modest quarters. Despite the day's oddities, there's a sense of comfort in knowing you've survived another royal feast, another day in the life of medieval peculiarities. You're ready for a quiet moment to yourself, but the medieval world has a funny way of keeping you on your toes. After all, there's always another strange job just around the corner, and the job of the king's toilet bodyguard is one that is perhaps even stranger than the one you just left behind. You think it's hard to imagine a bodyguard protecting someone in the restroom? Well, not so in medieval times. Imagine this. You're standing guard outside the royal lavatory, yes, the toilet, and your job is to make sure that no one, from commoners to would-be assassins, has the chance to harm the king while he's, well, taking care of business. It's a job that demands absolute attention to detail, and a whole lot of patience. Medieval kings were paranoid, rightfully so considering the constant threats to their rule, and the bodyguard guarding the royal toilet was one of the oddest manifestations of that paranoia. It wasn't enough to just have your usual guards patrolling the grounds or even watching the king during his court sessions. No, the king needed protection while he was on the porcelain throne, where he was most vulnerable. You can't help but imagine the tension in the air as a bodyguard stood near the royal lavatory, the faint sound of the king's movements behind the door, and there you are, standing at attention, making sure no one tries to slip by unnoticed. The king, no doubt, would have a few choice words for anyone who would dare breach the royal bathroom. After all, in the grand scheme of things, what could be more embarrassing than the assassination of a king in such a vulnerable position? It wasn't just about physical protection, it was also about making sure the king's privacy remained intact. In a world where spies and enemies lurked at every corner, even the simplest of activities, like using the restroom, could be fraught with danger. The bodyguard had to ensure no one could eavesdrop, spy through the cracks in the stone walls, or worse, sneak poison into the royal drink. But let's think about it for a moment. How did this job even come to be? Why would a king's toilet need protection? The answer is simple. Paranoia, yes, but also the prevalence of assassination attempts. In medieval times, a king's life was constantly at risk. Poisons, plots, and even direct attacks were commonplace. Having a royal bodyguard stationed near the restroom, a place where even the most vigilant of kings were most vulnerable, was just another way to keep the monarch safe. It might sound like something out of a slapstick comedy, but in reality, it was quite serious. The king's life, even while seated on the throne, was still under constant threat. This brings us to another odd yet vital medieval occupation, the rooster catcher. You'd think this job would be reserved for farmers or perhaps an amusing side gig for a child with too much free time. But no, in the medieval world, catching roosters was a job that required a surprising amount of skill and dedication. After all, roosters were not just farm animals. They were often used for practical purposes, such as keeping time or even being a part of royal feasts. A rooster catcher's job was as much about managing the chickens as it was about keeping them where they needed to be. The rooster catcher had a simple but necessary role in society, keeping those feisty birds in check. You probably can't imagine how such a simple task could be so important, but think about it. Medieval towns didn't have clocks, and the rooster's crowing was the alarm clock of the era. They announced the break of dawn, helped set the rhythm of life, and were prized. Possessions in many homes. And of course, there were the royal events where rooster meat was delicately prepared for lavish feasts. So if you were a rooster catcher, you had to have an eye for detail. You had to know how to catch them quickly and safely, preventing them from escaping into the streets or falling into the wrong hands. A runaway rooster might ruin a royal feast, and no one wanted to explain that to the king. But beyond the practical aspects of the job, there was also a certain magic associated with roosters. Some believed their crowing had spiritual significance, marking the change from night to day and signalling a fresh start. And so your role as a rooster catcher was not only to handle the birds, but to also maintain an air of reverence around them. You were, in some ways, the keeper of time in your community. Historians still wonder how many rooster catchers were able to accomplish their jobs without injury. After all, chickens, especially roosters, are not particularly fond of being caught. With sharp spurs on their legs and an impressive array of feathers, they didn't exactly go down easy. You might have to wrangle a rooster or two in the dead of night, all while trying to avoid getting pecked or trampled. A light-hearted job, you might think, but one that required patience, skill, and an understanding of both the animals and the humans they served. As you reflect on this odd profession, you realise how much each of these jobs was connected to the intricate web of life during the medieval period. No job was too small, and every role had its purpose. Whether it was the bodyguard outside the royal restroom or the rooster catcher who ensured the day began on time, the medieval world was built on these peculiar, often overlooked jobs. And the more you think about it, the more you realise, if you had been alive in those times, you might have found yourself in one of these roles. Maybe not the king's toilet guard, but perhaps a chambermaid, a rooster catcher, or even a taster, risking your life to ensure a king's safety over a bowl of soup. The day has faded into twilight as you make your way back through the now silent corridors of the castle. The sounds of dinner and laughter have long been replaced by the occasional shuffle of servants, finishing their tasks. The stone floors, cool underfoot, give a certain sense of calm. It's almost as if the castle itself is winding down for the night. But the medieval world, ever bustling and full of hidden surprises, still has a few more peculiar jobs to show you, and the next one is perhaps even stranger than the last. You've likely heard of the role of royal perfumers, but it's unlikely you've ever given much thought to what it truly entailed. Today, perfumes are all about luxury and glamour, but back in the medieval world, fragrance had a much more vital role to play. It wasn't just about smelling good, it was about status, hygiene, and even health. And for those tasked with making the royal family smell like royalty, it was about more than just mixing essential oils. The royal perfumer's job in the medieval court was both an art and a science. The complexity of scents was considered an essential part of daily life. Think of it this way. Without deodorant, soap, or modern hygiene practices, people didn't just want to smell good. They needed to cover up the unpleasant odours that permeated the air, especially in the warmer months. The royal perfumer wasn't merely creating sweet-smelling potions. They were developing an entire sensory experience for the king and queen. They were responsible for keeping the royal family smelling fresh and presentable, even when bathing wasn't an option. Now, imagine the kinds of ingredients that went into those perfumes. It wasn't all roses and lavender, as one might expect. A royal perfumer had a vast array of materials at their disposal: ambergris, musk, cinnamon, cloves, and even exotic spices imported from far-off lands. These scents, mixed carefully, were crafted not just to be pleasant, but to also symbolise the wealth and status of the king or queen. The act of scenting was just as much a demonstration of power as it was an attempt to mask the reality of the time. After all, royalty couldn't exactly walk into a room smelling like the stables they kept their horses in. But it wasn't just perfumes you had to worry about. The perfumer's work extended beyond fragrance into the realm of medicinal oils, soaps, and even cleansing balms. You might not have had access to your modern-day shower gel, but the royal perfumer could whip up concoctions that kept both body and mind in working order. And let's not forget the medicinal properties of some of these oils. What was often sold as fragrance was sometimes simply an elixir that could help cure a cold or an upset stomach. So the perfumer's job wasn't just about making sure everyone smelled pleasant. It was about using the power of scent to balance the body and soul. It's hard to imagine this job without wondering how much trial and error went into crafting these complex scents. How many attempts did the perfumers make before they got just the right mix? Was it possible that some of these concoctions, rather than soothing, caused headaches, dizziness, or worse? Historians still wonder just how accurate some of these medicinal perfumes were. Were they true remedies? Or just expensive attempts to hide the true odour of medieval life? Given the limited knowledge of medicine at the time, it's likely the line between healing potion and fragrant nonsense was often a blurry one. But back to your journey. As you walk deeper into the castle, the quietness of the halls is broken by the occasional flutter of feathers. The next odd job you'll encounter is the falconer, another essential role in the medieval court and one that carries with it an air of nobility. The role of the falconer was far more intricate than it might seem. You probably picture falcons flying high above the ground, majestic and free, but the reality was far more controlled. Falconry, as it was known, was an ancient practice that became a symbol of wealth and power during the medieval period. Only the wealthy, particularly kings, queens, and high-ranking nobles, could afford the luxury of falcons. The falconer's role was to train and manage these birds, ensuring they performed their duties to perfection. You might imagine the falconer standing tall with a bird perched on their arm, but the truth of the matter was that their job involved far more than simply admiring the bird's beauty. The falconer was also a meticulous caretaker, responsible for everything from feeding the birds to ensuring they were in top condition for their hunting duties. Falcons were used primarily for hunting, as their keen eyesight and remarkable speed made them ideal for catching prey in mid-flight. The falconer was the middleman between the noble hunting party and the wild, ensuring that the birds would catch only the finest game, from pheasants to partridges. But there's something else that sets falconers apart from other medieval workers. The bond between a falconer and their bird was often incredibly close. These birds weren't just tools for hunting, they were prized companions, treated almost as family members. The falconer had to understand the bird's moods, anticipate its movements, and communicate with it in a way that most modern animal trainers would find difficult to imagine. They knew their bird's tendencies inside and out, much like how a modern dog trainer knows the quirks of their pets. There's something almost magical about the relationship between a falconer and their bird. Historians still debate how far this connection went. Was it truly a form of companionship, or was it just an incredibly effective partnership forged out of necessity? Were falconers emotionally attached to their birds, or was the bond strictly professional? As a falconer, you wouldn't just feed the bird and release it. You would spend countless hours working with it, developing that trust and communication. And when it was time to hunt, the bond was what made the entire process so successful. As you stand in the courtyard, feeling the breeze stir your cloak once again, you can't help but imagine the medieval world as a place where every job, no matter how odd, had its purpose. Whether you're guarding the royal toilet or training falcons for the hunt, there was always a task to be done. Life was built on these little jobs, some glamorous, some grim, all essential. And while many of these jobs may seem strange to us now, they were integral to life back then. Without these roles, the medieval world would not have functioned as it did. The night has fallen fully now, and the stars above the castle seem to twinkle with an almost mystical quality. You can hear the faint rustle of leaves as the night breeze flows through the branches of nearby trees. But for now, the silence is only broken by the occasional clink of armour or the shuffle of a servant heading home after a long day. The air is cool, and the smell of the countryside, rich with earth and fresh-cut grass, mingles with the faint scent of smoke drifting from the hearths within the castle walls. As you move through the grounds, you reflect on the strange and sometimes humorous occupations that have marked this journey through the medieval world. From the taster who risked life and limb to ensure the king's food was safe, to the chambermaids who managed royal secrets and cleaned up the most private of matters, you've encountered jobs that most people would find completely unthinkable today. But one role in particular stands out, not just for its oddity, but for its sheer, well, necessity. This job wasn't glamorous, nor was it comfortable. In fact, it was downright unpleasant. But without it, medieval life could have fallen into chaos. And that job, the work of gong farmers. Let's break this down a bit, shall we? The gong farmers, as you can probably guess, had one of the least appetizing roles in the medieval world. Their job was simple, yet utterly unpleasant by today's standards. They were tasked with clearing out the waste from the cesspits, which were essentially open-air toilets. These cesspits were scattered throughout the medieval town, and while the wealthy might have had their own private facilities, the rest of the population relied on these shared pits. Now you might wonder, who would willingly take on such a vile job? The gong farmers, believe it or not, were essential to the functioning of any town or village. Without them, the waste would pile up, creating not only a health hazard, but also an overwhelming stench. The town would become a breeding ground for diseases, and the air would be thick with the unpleasant smells of human waste. For the poor souls tasked with this responsibility, the job was as necessary as it was degrading. But someone had to do it, and so the gong farmers stepped up. The work of a gong farmer was no small feat. It was dirty, physically demanding and smelly in the most extreme way. Armed with a variety of tools, they would dig through the cesspits and remove the accumulated waste. And no, it wasn't just a matter of shoveling it into a cart and dumping it somewhere else. Oh no, it was far more intricate than that. The waste had to be carefully removed, filtered, and often used in a variety of ways. For example, the manure might be used for fertilizing fields, while the rest was often simply dumped into the nearby rivers or lakes, where it would, in turn, pollute the water. The gong farmers didn't exactly get a lot of glory for their work. In fact, they were generally looked down upon by other medieval workers, relegated to the lowest rungs of society. But here's the thing. Without them, life as they knew it would have ground to a halt. You might not think much about the sanitation workers in your own life, but back then, those who managed waste were, in a twisted way, the unsung heroes of medieval civilization. Imagine the life of one of these workers, wading through muck, carrying heavy loads, and dealing with unimaginable smells. They were often required to work under the cover of darkness, which only added to the misery. The job wasn't just about removing waste, it was about maintaining public health and keeping the population from descending into chaos. And without this essential role, the towns and villages would have faced rapid declines in hygiene, food safety, and even social order. Historians still wonder just how many gong farmers truly understood the extent of their role. Was it a job they were resigned to, or did they take some strange pride in keeping the world running? While we can't say for sure, one thing is clear. In a world where cleanliness was often an afterthought, the gong farmers played an irreplaceable role. As you continue walking through the courtyard, your mind drifts toward another odd job, one that was a little less grim but still quite strange by today's standards. Enter the knocker-up, a job that you probably never imagined would exist in medieval times. The knocker-up was essentially a human alarm clock, and their job was to wake up the working class, especially those who had no access to the luxury of a modern alarm. It wasn't uncommon for people in medieval times to sleep in a deep slumber, and with the lack of an efficient timekeeping system, the knocker-up was called upon to help. Armed with a long stick or even a small cannon, the knocker-up would walk the streets early in the morning, tapping on windows to wake up the townsfolk and ensure they made it to work on time. It wasn't the most dignified profession, and it certainly wasn't glamorous, but it was a necessary one. Without the knocker-up, the day would begin far too late, and the entire town would fall behind in their work. The knocker-up had to be familiar with the routines of the people they served. They had to know who worked where, who had the hardest jobs, and who might need a little extra. Coaxing to get out of bed. It was a job that required tact, patience, and a keen sense of timing, but despite its oddness, the knocker-up played an important part in the daily life of the town. Without them, there would have been chaos. Perhaps it was the oddest of all the medieval professions, but it was one that you'd have to rely on to get your day started. Historians still wonder how the knocker-ups managed the social aspect of their job. Did they form relationships with the people they woke up each morning, or was it purely transactional? What did they do on their off hours, and how much respect did they command in a town where their role was both appreciated and ridiculed? These are questions that will likely remain unanswered, but they add to the mystique of the profession. You think about these strange jobs, the odd roles that helped the medieval world function, and realise how little we understand about the lives of those who lived centuries ago. These jobs may seem odd to us now, but they were necessary. Vital parts of a system that made the medieval world tick. As you wander through the castle grounds, the gentle sound of your footsteps echoes in the empty halls. You pause for a moment, taking in the scene, the flickering light of torches, the distant sound of the river, and the quiet stillness of the night, and you can't help but feel a sense of quiet admiration for the people who lived and worked in this strange, fascinating world. The quiet hum of the castle is calming as you move deeper into the grounds, the cool air brushing against your skin, and the scent of the night blooming all around you. The medieval world has a way of drawing you in, filling the space with the soft whispers of time. As you pass through the archway, the clatter of the market square has long since faded, replaced by the distant rumble of the river. The castle feels like a living thing, shifting with its own secrets, quietly and subtly changing as the hours drift by. And yet, as you take your next step, you realise there's always something strange and unexpected lurking in this world. A profession that might make you wonder if the medieval world really was all that different from our own. You're about to walk into the inner courtyard when you hear the familiar sounds of a bustling activity in the distance. The smell of something faintly burnt and the sound of scraping tools echo in the air, and you can't help but be intrigued. You move toward the source of the noise where, standing in front of the entrance, you find a rather unexpected role, the master of the stables. In the medieval world, horses were more than just a means of transportation. They were symbols of power, wealth, and nobility. Kings rode magnificent steeds, knights took to battle on their trusted war horses, and royal families relied on their horses for everything from hunting to travel, and that's where the master of the stables comes in. Unlike today, where horses are seen largely as recreational animals, medieval horses were paramount to the functioning of a kingdom or noble household. As the master of the stables, you had a job that was both physically demanding and steeped in tradition. You were responsible not only for the care and upkeep of the horses, but also for the management of the stables, ensuring that the animals were properly housed, fed and groomed. But it wasn't just about feeding and cleaning. You had to know horses inside and out. You had to understand their temperaments, their needs, and, of course, how to handle a wild stallion without getting yourself hurt. A noble's horse was an extension of themselves. If you could successfully manage the horses, you could secure the favour of the nobility. But it wasn't just the riding horses you had to worry about. There were also working horses, bred for farm labour, hauling goods, and even serving as draft animals. Each type of horse had a unique set of needs, and it was your job to ensure they were met. And in the royal stables, where horses were often treated like family members, you might even find yourself spending more time with the horses than you did with your fellow humans. After all, horses were essential not just for transportation, but also for defence, agriculture, and even the production of goods like leather and wool. As the master of the stables, you were the backbone of this system. You were the caretaker of the lifeblood of medieval society. You might not think of stables as being glamorous, but they were a hub of activity. Imagine walking in and being greeted by the soft whinnies of horses, the smell of hay mixed with leather, and the constant hum of activity as groomsmen prepare the steeds for their next use. The process of grooming a horse was an art form. You had to know just the right way to curry their coats, clean their hooves, and apply oils to their manes to ensure they stayed shiny and healthy. And if you were lucky enough to be tending to a royal stallion, you had to make sure they were prepared to carry the nobility into battle or across long distances. The mastery of the stables wasn't just about keeping the horses alive, it was about making them ready to perform, ready to serve. And yet, as vital as this role was, it wasn't without its challenges. A single mistake could cost a noble their prize mount, or worse, put them at risk in battle. There's a strange irony to the job of a master of the stables. You are simultaneously a caretaker and a protector. Your entire job revolved around keeping the horses in top condition, ensuring that the kingdom's most valuable assets were ready for service. Historians still debate how much influence the master of the stables truly had. Was this a role held by the most trusted servants, or was it a position that demanded leadership and authority over the noble court? Perhaps it was both. After all, to care for such precious creatures, you had to gain the respect of both horse and human. The job required patience, skill, and a deep understanding of these magnificent animals. You find yourself reflecting on the bond between the horses and their caretakers. Was it truly just business? Or did the groomsmen, masters of the stables, and knights feel something more? Were they emotionally attached to the horses that served them so faithfully? As you think about these ancient bonds, you realise how much of the medieval world was built on these relationships, between humans and animals, between the land and its caretakers, between the kings and their loyal servants. And just as you're lost in thought, you hear the unmistakable sound of hooves clopping against the cobblestones in the distance. It's a reminder that this world, with all its strange jobs and hidden stories, was still driven by the simplest of things: a horse, a carriage, a journey. And you, standing here now, are part of that intricate and often forgotten tapestry. You move on, the night air growing colder, and the stillness of the castle grounds gives way to the distant echoes of other medieval occupations, each with its own role in keeping the kingdom alive and well. The stables are but one piece of the puzzle, yet its importance can't be overstated. Just like the falconers, the gong farmers, and even the humble knocker-up, the master of the stables was an integral part of medieval society. Historians still debate the lasting impact of these jobs. How many of them were truly essential to the survival of the kingdom? Did the master of the stables play a greater role than we give them credit for? While we may never fully know the answers, one thing is certain. Without them, life in medieval society would have been quite different. Every task, no matter how small, played a role in shaping the world we know today. As the night deepens, you find yourself back at the castle, the last echoes of hooves fading into the distance. The medieval world, with its peculiar jobs and strange traditions, is a place where every role, no matter how odd, has its purpose. And as you settle into the quiet, you can't help but appreciate the strange beauty of it all, the quiet hum of life, the unnoticed tasks that kept everything running, and the many, many people who made it all happen. The castle grows quieter as the night draws in, the once bustling halls now nearly deserted. The torches lining the corridors cast their long, flickering shadows against the stone walls. A gentle wind outside sends the branches of the trees swaying, the rustling leaves providing a soft, natural lullaby. You pause for a moment to take it all in, the stillness, the serenity, the quiet comfort of the medieval world that has yet to relinquish its secrets to modern time. As you make your way toward the servants' quarters, your mind is filled with the odd, fascinating jobs that make up the very fabric of this time. The falconers, the gong farmers, the royal perfumers, they've all played their part in shaping the world of the past. But as you settle into your thoughts, a new, rather peculiar job crosses your mind, that of the professional tomb cleaner. At first glance, this job might seem more morbid than meaningful, but in the medieval world, tombs were more than just final resting places. They were sacred, revered spaces, often filled with both riches and reverence. Cleaning and maintaining these tombs was no small task, and it carried with it a level of importance that most people of the time took seriously. Imagine this: the grand tombs of noble families, filled with intricate carvings and ornate statues. Some were located in small chapels, while others were in lavish crypts beneath towering churches. These tombs, some hundreds of years old, held not just the remains of the dead, but also their legacies. To clean them, to polish the marble and stone, was to interact with history itself. A tomb cleaner's job wasn't simply about dusting off cobwebs. It was about preserving the memory of those who had passed and maintaining the dignity of their final resting places. But this wasn't just a job for the faint of heart. Tomb cleaners had to navigate through the mysterious atmosphere of ancient crypts. There were often eerie silences, the smell of old incense lingering in the air and the low hum of distant prayers echoing from nearby altars. And yes, sometimes there were eerie sounds, creaking stones, strange whispers carried by the wind, or the unnerving feeling of being watched. Medieval tombs were designed to be imposing, often built with great care and respect for the deceased, but their decaying state could be haunting. While this job might sound more fitting for an undertaker than a simple servant, it was essential to maintain the tombs of the nobility and the royalty. The job wasn't just about cleaning, it was also about maintaining an air of reverence and respect for the dead. For these tombs were sacred spaces, and their caretakers were entrusted with a solemn duty. Their work wasn't just practical, it was ceremonial, a quiet act of devotion to those who had gone before. Tomb cleaners often worked in dark, candle-lit chambers, where they would scrub the surfaces of the tombs with soft cloths and brushes, careful not to damage the intricate engravings or precious metals that adorned the resting places of the deceased. The tomb's atmosphere was often one of reverence mixed with fear, as medieval beliefs about the afterlife often painted the dead as still active forces, capable of influencing the world of the living. Historians are still unsure just how the tomb cleaners themselves viewed their work. Did they see it as a divine task? Or was it simply a job, one that they had to endure for a livelihood? The connection to the dead could have been both eerie and comforting. You can't help but imagine how strange it would feel to spend your days surrounded by the quiet dead, silently cleaning, silently respecting, all while knowing that in the next room, people were going about their everyday lives. Was it a job filled with a sense of awe, or one that felt cold and disconnected from the living world? Of course, tomb cleaners weren't just involved with tombs in royal crypts. They also tended to the tombs of local nobles, those whose families might not have the wealth of the royalty but still commanded respect in their communities. These tombs were smaller, simpler, but no less important to the people who revered them. In fact, sometimes it was in these smaller tombs that the most interesting cleaning work occurred. These tombs, often built in, out-of-the-way places, were sometimes hidden in plain sight, surrounded by the very people who had known the deceased in life. Cleaning these tombs was not just about maintaining a physical space. It was about maintaining a spiritual connection between the past and the present. And of course, there were those who believed the tombs had supernatural qualities. The tomb cleaner was often viewed as a guardian of sorts, a caretaker of the sacred dead. Historians still debate whether or not this job was respected by the people at large, or if it was something more mysterious, feared by the community. Were these cleaners seen as holy figures, or were they merely low-ranking servants who had the misfortune of working with the dead? The role certainly seems to carry both a sense of reverence and a sense of discomfort. The job wasn't just about cleaning, it was about preserving history, ensuring that the memories of the past lived on in the physical space. So as you find yourself wandering back toward the quiet corner of the castle, you realise how deeply embedded these strange professions were in the life of medieval society. These jobs were not just part of the everyday routine, they were essential to the very fabric of the world people inhabited. They were the quiet, unnoticed roles that held the kingdom together in the background, making sure everything, from royal tombs to royal feasts, went off without a hitch. And as much as some of these jobs might seem odd or grotesque today, they were at the time indispensable. Even now, centuries later, it's easy to forget how crucial these jobs were. They might seem like relics of a distant past, but they were the lifeblood of medieval society. The men and women who filled these roles were the quiet workers, the unsung heroes who kept the world turning, one strange job at a time. The morning light creeps slowly through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows over the stone floors as you wake. The world outside seems still, quiet, as if it too is recovering from the strange occupations of the night. But even as you stretch and prepare for the day, the world of medieval jobs is never far from your mind. As you step out into the castle's inner courtyard, you catch sight of another odd but essential occupation that might have flown under your radar, the master of the manor's food taster, who had a different role than the royal taster. Now we all know about the infamous royal food tasters, the ones who risked it all for the king or queen's safety. But let's not forget about the humble master of the manor's food taster, a role that came with its own set of peculiarities. The master of the manor's food taster wasn't quite as high profile as their royal counterparts, but their job was just as important. Their task. Ensuring the food served at the noble family's table was safe to eat, which, in a time when food safety wasn't exactly a given, was a critical responsibility. Unlike the royal taster, who had the extra layer of paranoia and danger of poison in the food, the master of the manor's taster often dealt with a different kind of challenge: the quality of the food. It wasn't enough to make sure there were no hidden toxins or venomous substances lurking in the meal. Instead, they had to assess the freshness of ingredients, the taste, and whether the cooking techniques were appropriate. They were the first line of defense against spoiled meat or undercooked poultry, ensuring that the manor's meals were of the highest quality. Imagine this: you're standing in a large, ornately decorated dining hall, the smell of rich stews and baked goods filling the air. The master of the manor's food taster would be standing just outside the kitchen, waiting for the first course to be served. Their role was not unlike that of an experienced chef, though it didn't involve creating the dishes. Instead, they sampled each dish to ensure it was safe and palatable. The taster would usually have a bit of the dish before anyone else, assessing it for taste, texture, and even checking for any signs of contamination. If the food was deemed acceptable, the banquet would go on as planned, but if something was wrong, Well, they would have to warn the staff and the entire feast could come to a halt. While this job might not carry the same kind of high-stakes tension as the royal food taster, it still had its challenges. The taster was often expected to assess large quantities of food, from the simple bread to the elaborate roasted meats that would fill the banquet table. They had to be able to distinguish between a subtle spice mix that enhanced the flavour and one that could leave a horrible aftertaste. They weren't just judging flavour, they were ensuring that every meal was perfect. And here's a quirky part. In many cases, food tasters were also expected to drink wine, ale, or other beverages to ensure that they were free from any off flavours or contamination. You might think it's a cushy job, a wine connoisseur of sorts, but in reality, there were many. Things that could go wrong. What if the wine was too sour, the meat too dry? Or worse, the food was simply spoiled from improper handling. Historians still debate how many noble families took the food taster seriously. Were they just going through the motions of testing, or was this an absolutely critical role in the household? It's hard to know for certain, but the evidence suggests that the food taster's job wasn't just ceremonial. It was, in many ways, a lifeline. Without someone to keep an eye on the food, the family could face illness, and it could ruin a perfectly good feast, making the food taster's role an unassuming yet vital part of medieval life. As you walk past the kitchens and toward the stables, you realise that every job, no matter how strange, was deeply embedded in the culture of medieval society. Take the beer tasters, for instance, another group of workers who, on the surface, might seem a bit more enjoyable but were every bit as essential to the kingdom's well-being. Imagine the scene. The warm, heady aroma of hops fills the air, and you find yourself standing alongside brewers at a local tavern or royal court. The beer taster's role was to ensure that the beer met the high standards required for the kingdom's noble households and taverns. Just like modern beer critics, these tasters had a highly refined palate, able to distinguish between different types of grains and fermentation methods. But beer wasn't just about taste, it was also about safety. Before refrigeration, beer could easily spoil, and with the lack of advanced sanitization, it was prone to contamination. The beer taster had to ensure that the ale served at court wasn't going to make anyone sick. They had to check the texture, the colour, and the consistency of the brew. A taster might sample dozens of different brews throughout the day, assessing each one for its quality before it reached the drinking mugs of the nobility. Though the role of the beer taster might seem like the life of luxury, tasting and evaluating fine brews, it was still a demanding task. The taster had to be vigilant, carefully observing every detail to ensure that what was being served was fit for consumption. They had to know the exact temperature to serve beer at, the right level of bitterness, and the perfect balance between malts and hops. A bad batch of beer could ruin an entire feast, and the taster was the first line of defence. And speaking of alcohol, the medieval wine taster had an equally fascinating role. Medieval winemaking wasn't like it is today. They didn't have modern filtration methods, and the wine was sometimes riddled with imperfections. The wine taster's role wasn't just to judge the taste of the wine, they had to ensure it was free from contamination and that it was drinkable. You can imagine the range of flavours they might have encountered, from deliciously aged red wines to sour, spoiled concoctions that had turned into something almost unrecognisable. Historians are still unsure how the medieval wine taster was able to stay objective in such an environment. Were they merely checking for quality, or did they have to endure some truly questionable brews? How did they navigate the balance between loyalty to the family they served and their own well-being when faced with a batch of undrinkable wine? Perhaps this was a job that was as much about patience and resilience as it was about an impeccable palate. As you make your way back to the castle, you can't help but feel a sense of awe for the roles that were once so integral to the survival of medieval society. These strange, often unnoticed jobs were the lifeblood of the kingdom. The food taster, the beer taster, the falconer, and even the master of the stables, they all played their part in the grand symphony of medieval life. Though their jobs might seem odd, even unnecessary, it's clear that the fabric of medieval society was woven through the hands of these unsung workers. And as the night deepens and the castle sleeps, you realise that even in the quietest corners of the past, there are stories to be told. The strange, quirky jobs that have shaped history are still with us, lingering in the silence of the present. The sun is beginning to set as you make your way back across the castle courtyard, the golden light slowly fading into the shadows. The soft sounds of the evening's activities hum in the background, a gentle reminder of the rhythm of life that continues even in this quieter part of the day. The medieval world, despite its quirks and complexities, moves with a sense of purpose, a never-ending flow of tasks, trades, and traditions. But as you make your way toward the stables, you find your attention drawn to yet another curious medieval job, the rat catcher. It's easy to overlook the importance of such a role. Rats were no strangers to the medieval world, quite the opposite. These creatures were as much a part of life as the townsfolk, and they brought with them not only an unpleasant presence, but also a series of health threats that no one could ignore. Imagine being in charge of an entire town's cleanliness and public health, and then having to fight an invisible army of rodents carrying diseases that could wipe out entire communities. This was the job of the rat catcher, a role that carried with it both the weight of responsibility and a reputation for grit and determination. The work of the rat catcher was, unsurprisingly, dirty. It wasn't just about catching the occasional rat here and there. It was about keeping the entire town from falling prey to disease. Medieval cities, with their narrow, crowded streets and open sewers, were a perfect breeding ground for rats. And with the absence of modern pest control methods, it was up to the rat catcher to ensure that these rodents didn't run rampant and spread plague, cholera, and other diseases. Rat catchers were often highly skilled at trapping these pests. They had an array of tools at their disposal: traps, poison, and sometimes even trained animals. But it wasn't just about setting a trap and hoping for the best. The rat catcher had to know where the rats were most likely to be hiding, whether that was in the cellars, under the floors of houses, or behind the walls of kitchens. In some cases, the rat catcher would even go so far as to crawl through the murky sewers to hunt down entire colonies of rats that had taken up residence there. And yet, despite the importance of this role, rat catchers were often regarded with a certain amount of disdain. They were seen as the lowliest of the low, the ones who dealt with the filth and disease no one else wanted to face, but in reality their work was critical. Without rat catchers, the spread of disease would have been far worse. Historians often wonder how much respect these workers commanded in their own time. Did the community value their contributions, or did they simply endure their presence because they had no other choice? One of the most fascinating aspects of the rat catchers' work was their relationship with their tools and their animals. The best rat catchers didn't just use traps and poison, they often employed specially trained dogs or ferrets, animals that were skilled at chasing down and capturing rats. These animals were the rat catcher's most trusted companions, and they were trained from a young age to track and kill rats with incredible precision. The bond between a rat catcher and their animal was critical to the success of the job. It wasn't just about the animal doing the work, it was about the teamwork between human and animal, each understanding the other's cues and needs. The sound of a rat catcher at work was unmistakable. The rustling of rats scurrying in the walls, the faint clicking of traps snapping shut, and the low growl of a dog as it cornered a rat in a dark corner of a cellar. It was a noisy, chaotic scene, but one that was necessary to keep the population safe from the hidden dangers lurking beneath the streets. But as you reflect on this, you realise that the role of the rat catcher wasn't just about trapping and killing. It was about managing fear of disease, fear of the unknown, and fear of the unseen enemy that scurried about in the shadows. Rat catchers were, in many ways, the quiet heroes of the medieval world, working in the background to ensure that communities remained safe. Without them, the city would have been overwhelmed by the spread of disease. And yet, as important as their role was, they were seldom celebrated or recognised in the way other old professions were. As you continue your walk through the castle's inner grounds, you find yourself thinking about the many strange, often overlooked jobs that played crucial roles in the world you've come to know. From the knight who polished his armour every morning to the poor soul tasked with emptying the king's chamber pot, every role had its place. In many ways, medieval society was like a giant clock, and each strange job was a cog in the machine that kept the whole thing running smoothly. But there's still more to explore, and you feel drawn to the stables, where the master of the stables is hard at work. The job of the master of the stables isn't as glamorous as it might sound, but it's an integral part of the daily workings of the royal household. These men and women were responsible for not only tending to the horses, but also for overseeing the care and management of the royal steeds. They made sure the horses were well fed, well groomed, and ready to perform when the time came. It's easy to forget how much of medieval life revolved around horses. Whether it was for travel, war or sport, horses were a vital part of everyday life. The master of the stables, with their quiet authority, made sure that the royal horses were ready to meet the demands placed upon them. The stables themselves were often large, bustling places, filled with the sound of hooves and the smells of hay and leather. The job required not only physical labour, but also a deep understanding of animal behaviour. The master of the stables had to know which horses could be trusted in battle, and which ones were best suited for the quieter life of the royal courts. As you watch the master of the stables work, you can't help but admire the dedication and care that goes into such a job. It's not just about feeding and cleaning, it's about understanding the horses, knowing their personalities and ensuring they remain in peak condition. And of course, the master of the stables also had to deal with the occasional temperamental horse, which could prove both frustrating and dangerous. Historians still debate how the role of the master of the stables evolved over time. Was it simply a caretaking job, or was it something more? Were the stables ever seen as places of prestige and power, or were they just another back-office operation? The answer is likely a combination of both. The master of the stables, like many other medieval workers, played a quiet but vital role in ensuring the smooth operation of royal life. As the night wears on, you find yourself back in the castle's inner courtyard, the night sky now fully in place above you. The soft hum of the castle is like a lullaby, and you can't help but feel a sense of peace settle over you. The medieval world, with all its quirks and peculiarities, may be a thing of the past, but its strange jobs and the people who filled them still linger in the air. You wonder if, in some quiet corner of history, the roles of these workers were ever truly appreciated. But no matter how strange their jobs may seem now, they were the heartbeat of a time long gone, keeping the gears of the medieval world turning day after day. The chill of the night air is a welcome reprieve from the day's warmth as you take a quiet stroll through the castle gardens. The moon casts a soft glow over the well-maintained hedges, and the sweet scent of evening flowers lingers in the air. The sounds of the castle's servants winding down for the night are barely audible, but you know that somewhere in the distance, the clinking of pots and pans continues as the last few stragglers finish their duties. In this stillness, your thoughts return once again to the peculiar jobs that made medieval society tick. It's hard not to think about the king's personal bodyguard, a role that, while associated with power and prestige, had its own strange intricacies. The king's bodyguard wasn't simply a hired protector. They were part of a larger, complex web of trust that extended far beyond what you might imagine. These men were entrusted with the task of ensuring the king's safety, but their job went far deeper than just protecting the royal family from physical harm. One of the most fascinating aspects of this job was the sheer level of proximity that the bodyguard had to the king. They were essentially a constant, often invisible presence. Unlike the dramatic, showy guards you might see today standing at attention outside palaces, the medieval bodyguard was often closer to the king than anyone else in the kingdom. They travelled with him, ate beside him, and slept within arm's reach. There was a strange intimacy to the relationship between the king and his bodyguards. The trust between them was paramount. If a bodyguard failed in their duties, even in the smallest way, the consequences could be dire, not just for the king, but for the entire kingdom. In a time when threats could come from anywhere, poison in the king's wine, a traitor within the royal court, or even the mercenaries hired by a rival, these bodyguards had to be hyper-aware at all times. There were no advanced surveillance systems, no panic buttons or quick escape routes. It was all about human instincts, strength and loyalty. Imagine the constant vigilance of standing guard while the king dined, slept, or attended meetings, waiting for the moment when danger might strike. But beyond the physical protection, there was something more subtle at play. The role of psychological protector. The bodyguard wasn't just there to stop a dagger from reaching the king's heart. They were there to shield him from the constant pressures and stresses of ruling a kingdom. When the king faced a difficult decision, the bodyguard was often the one to reassure him, calm him, and offer quiet counsel when needed. The bond between them wasn't just one of protection, it was a deeply emotional connection that helped maintain the balance of power in the kingdom. Historians still wonder how much of a true relationship these bodyguards had with the king. Were they more than just hired hands? Did they see themselves as servants of the crown, or did they take on the role with a sense of personal honour? It's likely that the answer varies from one bodyguard to another, but what remains clear is that their role in the royal household was incredibly complex, both physical and psychological. As you move deeper into the garden, the moonlight casts long shadows, and you can't help but wonder about another equally strange role in the medieval world, the taster. But this isn't just any food taster. No, this was a taster for royal wine. Wine, a drink often reserved for the elite and noble, was a symbol of wealth and status in medieval society. But with that luxury came the constant threat of poisoning, and that's where the royal wine taster came in. The job of a wine taster was as much about expertise as it was about survival. These individuals were tasked with ensuring that the wine the king or queen drank was free from poison. The concept of poisoning was so prevalent during the medieval period that even the most powerful people in the kingdom couldn't feel truly safe without the assurance that their wine had been tested. But here's where it gets interesting. A royal wine taster wasn't just someone who checked for poison. They also had to ensure that the quality of the wine was up to snuff. After all, royalty didn't drink anything less than the best. Imagine standing in front of a magnificent feast, a long oak table, set with golden goblets and platters of rich meats. The wine is poured into the goblets, and it's the wine taster's job to sip from the glass first, checking for both taste and toxins. The act itself was as ceremonial as it was dangerous, and it required a refined palate, one capable of distinguishing the finest nuances of flavour and the faintest traces of poison. It wasn't just about sipping and nodding in approval, it was about ensuring the survival of the royal family. The danger in this role wasn't just physical, it was social. To fail in your task as the royal wine taster could mean not just death, but dishonour. What if you missed the subtle hint of poison in the wine? Or worse, what if the wine tasted off, and the king or queen suffered for it? The taster's role was riddled with anxiety, as one mistake could lead to immediate consequences. And let's not forget the most unsettling part of the job, the knowledge that you were literally gambling with your life every time you sampled a new bottle of wine. You never knew if this one would be the poisoned batch. Historians still wonder about the exact details of how these tasters went about their job. Did they always know what to look for? Were they skilled enough to differentiate between an ordinary batch of wine and one that had been tampered with? The art of wine tasting in the medieval court was so intricate and delicate that it may have been an entire field of expertise unto itself, one that required both instinct and experience to navigate. And so, as you continue your stroll, the moonlight seems to grow brighter, casting everything in a soft, serene glow. You find yourself reflecting on the sheer number of unusual and unexpected jobs that helped medieval life function. The taster, the bodyguard, the falconer, and the rat catcher. Each one played their role, often unnoticed but always essential. These unsung jobs, often filled with risks and challenges, were the invisible threads that wove the fabric of medieval society. The kings and queens relied on their protectors, their tasters, and their caretakers to ensure that their kingdoms thrived. And while these roles might seem strange to us now, it's easy to see how important they were in their own time. As you step back into the quiet confines of the castle, you can't help but marvel at the oddity and necessity of these medieval jobs. Their legacies live on in the stories, the whispers of history that still echo in the stone walls of castles like this one. Even now, you can feel the weight of those roles, the small but significant tasks that kept the kingdom running smoothly, day after day, year after year. As the night deepens, the castle feels even more like a place suspended in time. The flickering light from the torches dances across the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seem to tell stories of their own. The quiet hum of the castle's daily rhythm continues, though the grounds are now mostly still. Yet within the walls of this imposing structure, there are still so many untold stories of strange medieval jobs. Jobs that were once indispensable, even if they seem absurd or foreign to us today. And as you walk slowly through the courtyard, another strange and often forgotten occupation crosses your mind: the herb gatherer. Imagine, if you will, the dense forests that surround the castle. Forests filled with mystical plants and wild herbs, each one serving a distinct purpose. The job of the herb gatherer was critical, and though it may sound quaint by today's standards, it played an essential role in the well-being of the medieval household. The herb gatherer wasn't just collecting plants for decoration or for a pleasant aroma. They were gathering plants for medicinal purposes, for cooking, and for all sorts of practical uses that most people today might take for granted. You might picture the herb gatherer walking through the forest with a basket in hand, carefully plucking the leaves of rosemary or thyme, or collecting a handful of lavender for its calming properties. But this wasn't just a leisurely walk in the woods. The herb gatherer had to be a highly knowledgeable individual, well versed in both the medicinal properties of plants and the dangers of those that could harm you. A small mistake in identifying a plant could lead to dire consequences, as some herbs could be incredibly toxic if used incorrectly. As you move through the grounds, the image of the herb gatherer becomes clearer. These individuals had to navigate dense forests or untamed fields, often braving the elements and avoiding potential dangers to the plants they needed. These herbs weren't just used in cooking. They were also used to treat everything from minor cuts to serious illnesses. Before modern medicine, the herbal remedies crafted by these gatherers were the go-to solutions for treating sickness, alleviating pain, or improving health. A well-known healer would rely on their knowledge of local herbs, gathering plants seasonally and preserving them for use throughout the year. You can imagine the preparation that went into this work. Herb gatherers had to know the best times to harvest, the best ways to preserve the plants, and how to prepare them for medicinal use. Some herbs could be dried and stored for months, while others were best used fresh. The role of the herb gatherer, often working with healers and physicians, was crucial in ensuring that the community had access to remedies when illness struck. But this job wasn't without its challenges. The forests were not always friendly, and there were wild animals to contend with, not to mention the occasional bandit looking to take advantage of someone on their own in the woods. The herb gatherer had to be resilient and resourceful, knowing how to navigate the wilderness with nothing more than their knowledge and tools. Perhaps it wasn't a glamorous job, but it was undoubtedly one of the most essential, ensuring that people survived in a time when modern medicine was out of reach. Historians still debate just how much of the medieval medicine was rooted in superstition versus practical knowledge. Were the herbs really effective, or were people simply hopeful that they might work? In many ways, the herbalist's work was as much about faith as it was about knowledge. But whatever the truth may be, the herb gatherer's role was deeply embedded in the community. They were the quiet caretakers of health, working tirelessly to ensure that everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the highest noble, had access to the remedies they needed. And as you think about this job, you realise that the humble herb gatherer is just another example of a role that may seem odd by today's standards, but was integral to survival in the medieval world. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't respected in the way the king's bodyguard might have been, but without the herb gatherer, the very fabric of life would have been weaker. As you continue your walk, the moon's light gently illuminating the stone paths, another role comes to mind: the beadle. Now, this is a job you might have heard of before, but you probably don't know exactly what it entailed. The beadle was a church official, but not the kind you'd expect. While many church officials were involved in religious matters, the beadle's role was far more practical. They were the enforcers of order and discipline within the church and beyond. Imagine, if you will, that the beadle was the church's equivalent of a bouncer, and not just in the church, but in the community. They ensured that church services ran smoothly, making sure people sat in the right places, didn't cause disturbances, and generally adhered to the rules. The beadle was responsible for maintaining order during the service, often using a staff or whistle to keep the peace. If someone was caught speaking out of turn or causing trouble, it was the beadle who would deal with them. But the beadle's role wasn't just limited to the church. They were also the messengers of the town or village, delivering official notices, proclamations, and sometimes even enforcing fines or punishments for minor infractions. They could be seen going from house to house delivering news or gathering people for special events or ceremonies. In a way, they were the eyes and ears of the church and the town, keeping things running smoothly and ensuring that no one strayed too far from the accepted norms. Historians often debate just how much power the beadle really had. Were they respected by the community, or were they just feared? It's likely that their role varied depending on the town, but what is clear is that the beadle played a crucial role in ensuring that medieval life ran as smoothly as possible. In many ways, the beadle was the silent enforcer of social norms, making sure that people followed the rules, whether those rules were religious, civic, or social. You can imagine the quiet authority of the beadle striding through the streets with their staff in hand, their presence a reminder to all that order was paramount. They may not have been in charge of the most important decisions, but their work ensured that everything else could happen without chaos. As you near the castle entrance, your thoughts linger on the strange but vital roles that filled the medieval world. The herb gatherer, the beadle, the rat catcher, and even the bodyguard, they were the unsung heroes of their time, filling essential roles that, though odd and often unnoticed, were key to the success of society. Their work was invisible, but it was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of life. As the cool night air settles over the castle, the stars twinkle overhead in their eternal pattern. The sounds of the evening, quiet now, offer a sense of peace as you move deeper into the castle grounds. You can almost hear the whispers of the past drifting through the stone walls, each whisper a reminder of the strange, often forgotten roles that once filled the medieval world. Even in the most majestic of castles, these jobs were crucial to the survival and stability of the kingdom. Each role, no matter how odd it seemed, was an indispensable cog in the machinery of medieval life. As you move toward the northern wing, the smell of fresh bread wafts toward you, a reminder that even in the past, food was never too far from the minds of the people. And yet, there was one job that stood apart from the rest, a job that carried with it a certain mystique and an oddly glamorous yet dangerous aura: the royal food taster. This was not a position for the faint of heart, and the responsibilities of this job were as vital as they were daunting. The royal food taster's job, as you might imagine, wasn't merely to sample the food for taste. No, their primary responsibility was to test the food for poison. In a time when poisoning was a common method of political assassination, the role of the food taster was absolutely critical to the safety of the monarch. But it wasn't as simple as just tasting a spoonful of soup to ensure it was safe. The taster had to test every dish, every drink, and every bite of food that the king or queen would consume. They would sample the food first, wait for the effects, and only then could the royal family dine in peace. But the life of a royal food taster wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about enjoying fine meals or indulging in the luxuries of the palace. It was about constantly living with the looming threat of death. The taster's work wasn't just about food, it was about survival. In many cases, it was the food taster who was the first victim of a plot to poison the royal family. The taster risked life and limb for their master, putting their own health in jeopardy every time they performed their job. You can imagine the strange tension that must have filled the royal dining rooms as the food taster took their first bite. The rest of the court would watch carefully, silently praying that the taster remained unscathed. And while the taster might have been paid handsomely for their services, there was no guarantee that the money would make up for the risk of death that they faced daily. The job was a high-stakes gamble, and even the most seasoned tasters could never fully relax, knowing that the next plate of food might be their last. Historians still wonder about the emotional toll of this job. Were food tasters deeply bonded to their kings and queens, or did they view it as just another job? Was the role filled with a sense of duty, or did it come with a sense of resentment? Given the constant danger and the psychological pressure, it's likely that the food taster's role was both mentally and physically exhausting. Perhaps it was the quiet heroism of their position that truly mattered. For in their hands, or rather their mouths, lay the safety of the kingdom itself. But there was another, more whimsical role in the castle, one that stood in stark contrast to the dangerous job of the food taster. The job of the royal jester may sound more entertaining, but it too came with its own set of peculiarities. The jester, unlike the food taster, didn't have to risk their life daily, but they did face an entirely different set of challenges. The royal jester's job was to entertain, but it wasn't just about telling jokes or doing tricks. The jester had to navigate a delicate balance between humour and satire. They were allowed, even encouraged, to mock the royal family and the nobility, but they had to do so without crossing any lines. A jester's job was to keep the court entertained while walking a fine line between humour and offence. One wrong joke, one misstep, and they could find themselves on the wrong end of the royal wrath. But here's the twist. The jester's humour wasn't just about making people laugh. They were often sharper than they seemed, capable of weaving social commentary and even political criticism into their performances. Some jesters were known to have been trusted advisors, capable of speaking truth to power through the guise of humour. The jester's freedom of speech was unparalleled in the royal court, but it came with the constant threat of being sentenced if they pushed too far. Imagine the jester, standing in front of the court, juggling and dancing, while all the while they were delivering sly remarks about the king's policies, the nobility's actions, or the absurdities of court life. Historians still debate whether jesters were simply entertainers, or whether they played a more politically charged role in the royal court. Were they truly given the freedom to speak freely, or were they just performing for the amusement of their rulers? But regardless of their role in politics, the jester's personal risk was significant. Even if they were clever enough to mask their critiques in humour, there was always the chance they would offend someone with too much influence. Being on the royal payroll didn't necessarily mean job security. Many jesters met untimely ends, either by accident or by royal command, depending on how their jokes were received. And yet, despite the danger, jesters continued to hold an important role in the entertainment of the court. They were the life of the party, but they also had a dark side, one that could make even the most powerful monarchs uncomfortable. As you walk through the dimly lit corridors, the castle seems to be holding its breath, as if waiting for the next whisper of history to rise from the shadows. You realise that the jester, the food taster, the falconer, the rat catcher, all of these roles were like quiet gears in the machinery of the medieval world. Each job had its own peculiarities, its own risks, and its own rewards. They weren't glamorous roles, but they were absolutely vital to the way of life. It's easy to imagine the medieval world as being defined by the knights and kings, by the battles fought and the lands won. But in reality, it was these strange, often unnoticed jobs that made the world go round. Without the food taster, the jester, or the rat catcher, the medieval world would have been a much darker, much more chaotic place. It was the quiet, unassuming workers who kept the kingdom functioning. And as you make your way back to your room, you can't help but think about the strange jobs you've learned about on this journey. They were jobs filled with danger, humour and intrigue, but ultimately, they were the roles that made the medieval world tick. You find yourself wondering just how many more of these odd, essential jobs have been lost to time, waiting for someone to uncover them and tell their stories once again. The air is cooler now, and you feel the quiet weight of the night as it settles over the castle. The stars are bright overhead, their soft glow illuminating the stone walls and creating long, winding shadows on the ground. As you walk deeper into the castle's courtyard, you feel an odd sense of familiarity with the strange medieval world you've come to know. It's as if the lives of these long-forgotten workers and their peculiar roles have become more real, more tangible, and while the castle's outer walls might seem strong and unyielding, the stories you've uncovered are softer, more fragile, like whispers carried on the wind. And yet, despite the peaceful evening, your mind is still drawn to the countless occupations that were essential in maintaining the medieval kingdom. You've learned about the taster, the falconer, and even the master of the stables. But there's still more to uncover, more odd, unnoticed roles that helped keep society running. One such role, often misunderstood but absolutely necessary, was the gong farmer. Now, the name itself may sound like something out of a humorous storybook, but the job was anything but comical. Gong farmers were responsible for cleaning out the cesspits, the very waste disposal systems of medieval towns and villages. These cesspits were often little more than large open pits dug into the ground, filled with human waste, animal droppings, and whatever else found its way into the muck. While today waste disposal is a modern science, in the medieval world it was far more rudimentary and incredibly dirty. The gong farmer's job was simple, yet vital. They were tasked with removing the waste from these pits and ensuring the health and hygiene of the community. Without them, medieval towns would have been overrun with disease. The stench alone would have made living in these places nearly unbearable. As strange and uncomfortable as the role may seem, the work of the gong farmer was one of the most essential tasks in any medieval settlement. It wasn't just about shoveling waste into carts and dumping it in some remote area. Gong farmers had to be resourceful in how they managed the waste. The muck they removed from the cesspits was often used in farming, either as fertilizer or in other agricultural processes. Some gong farmers even used the waste to create fuel for heating. It was a gross job, to say the least, but one that contributed greatly to the economy and survival of the community. Despite the importance of their work, gong farmers were often seen as outsiders, lowly individuals who performed a job that no one else wanted. There was little to no recognition for their efforts, and they were often viewed with disdain. In fact, many were forced to work in the dead of night, away from the prying eyes of others. Historians still wonder how the gong farmers managed to stay so resilient in the face of their social status. Did they take pride in their work, knowing how essential they were? Or did they view it as a simple necessity, something they had to endure to survive? As you walk past the stables, where the horses are quietly settled for the night, your mind lingers on the idea of these jobs that seem so distant from modern life. They were dirty, thankless roles that required not just physical labour, but a certain mental fortitude, a willingness to face the unpleasant and the uncomfortable day after day. And yet, it's easy to see how these workers, The gong farmers, the rat catchers, and even the food tasters were vital to the fabric of medieval society. Think about it. Without these strange jobs, the kingdom would have fallen into disarray. The lords and kings might have worn fine clothes, attended feasts and waged wars. But the men and women who performed these strange roles in the background were the ones who ensured that life went on. You find yourself wandering further through the castle's garden path, the soft hum of the night surrounding you. You can still smell the remnants of fresh herbs carried by the wind, an aroma you had encountered earlier in your journey. The job of the herb gatherer comes to mind once again. These workers, often seen as simple foragers, were in fact the backbone of medieval healing and cooking. The herb gatherer wasn't just picking plants for the sake of it, they were gathering nature's medicine and essential ingredients that would help sustain the community. Herbal remedies were often the only options available to people in medieval times. From curing headaches to healing wounds, herbs were integral to everyday life. The job of the herb gatherer was one of both knowledge and instinct. They had to know the local landscape, understand the various plants that grew in the region, and how to harvest them at just the right time. There was a sense of sacredness to their role, as the herbs they gathered weren't just for consumption, they were often used in rituals and ceremonies too. But the job didn't come without its challenges. The herb gatherer had to be familiar with the dangers of certain plants. Some herbs, while medicinal, were toxic if used improperly. The gatherer had to know how to differentiate between a plant that would heal and one that would harm. One wrong move, one poorly identified plant, and the consequences could be fatal. Historians are still fascinated by the mystical elements of the herb gatherer's work. There was, after all, a magical quality to their tasks. People of the medieval era believed that certain plants had special properties. Some could ward off evil spirits, while others were thought to bring good fortune. It's hard to know just how much of the herb gatherer's work was rooted in science versus superstition. But one thing is certain, they were highly valued members of their community. Their work transcended the physical. It connected to something deeper, more spiritual. As you reflect on these roles, the sound of your footsteps on the gravel path seems to take on a more rhythmic quality. The stillness of the night amplifies your thoughts, and you realise just how much these roles mattered. The strange jobs that seem so foreign now were vital to the medieval world. They might not have been glamorous, and they might have been considered beneath others, but without them, society wouldn't have functioned. You pause for a moment, taking it all in. The quiet beauty of the night, the reminders of a distant past, and the strange but essential jobs that kept life moving forward. It's easy to forget that in every time period there are those who work behind the scenes to ensure the success of the world around them. The gong farmers, the rat catchers, the food tasters, they might not have had the spotlight, but they had purpose. The soft breeze stirs the air, a gentle reminder that the night is still young. As you walk further through the castle grounds, the path seems to stretch on forever, winding between thick stone walls, lush greenery, and ancient statues. The moon, high above, casts a silvery light, guiding your way as you think back on all the strange, essential jobs that you've uncovered during this journey. They were jobs that, at first glance, seemed out of place in a world of knights and kings, of grand battles and royal feasts, and yet, in their own way, they were the unsung heroes of the medieval kingdom. One such job, while seemingly inconspicuous, was that of the night watchman. The night watchman had a role that, on the surface, might have seemed dull. After all, their task was simple enough: watch the castle by the night to ensure that it was safe, but there was a surprising amount of responsibility tied to this role. The night watchman wasn't just standing around, staring at the dark, waiting for something to happen. They were the first line of defence against thieves, invaders, or anyone who might try to harm the kingdom under the cover of darkness. The night watchman's job, much like the beadle, was a role of quiet authority. They had the responsibility of ensuring that everything remained in order as the world slept. From the stables to the courtyards, the night watchman patrolled the castle, keeping watch over the noble families and their servants. It was a solitary job filled with vigilance and a deep awareness of everything around them. Every creak of the wooden beams, every rustle in the distance could mean something. Sometimes it was just the wind, but other times it was a sign that danger was near. One of the most fascinating aspects of the night watchman's role was that they were responsible not just for the security of the castle, but for the safety of the town surrounding it as well. In many cases, the night watchman would signal the town to ensure that everyone was aware of any potential threats. The watchman might use a horn to alert the villagers of danger, or a simple bell to signal the arrival of an important visitor. It was a job that demanded constant attention and often loneliness. But despite the low-key nature of the role, the night watchman had the power to make decisions that could change the course of the night. They had to decide whether to approach someone they saw lurking in the shadows or wait to see if the situation became clearer. Their decisions could lead to the capture of a criminal or the prevention of a robbery. In the dead of night, it was often the watchman's instinct and judgment that guided their actions. Historians still wonder how night watchmen were trained for their roles. Were they chosen for their physical prowess, or was it their ability to remain calm under pressure that made them suitable? The truth is likely a combination of both, as these watchmen had to stay vigilant and make quick, often life or death decisions. Their job wasn't glamorous. In fact, it was often a thankless task. But without them, the safety of the entire kingdom could have been compromised. As you continue your walk, your thoughts shift to another odd and quiet role. One that involved far less physical danger, but still played a significant part in the castle's daily life. The king's personal scribe. In the medieval world, writing wasn't just a skill, it was a powerful tool. The king's scribe was responsible for recording important documents, letters, and decrees. They were the keepers of knowledge, often working in the royal court, writing everything from legal documents to letters of diplomacy. The king's scribe had to have immaculate handwriting and an understanding of both the formal language and the inner workings of the kingdom. The job of the scribe was more than just putting ink to parchment. They were trusted servants, responsible for recording the king's thoughts, commands, and plans. But it wasn't just about transcribing orders, it was about crafting the future. Many royal decisions were first written down, giving them the stability and authority they needed to be enacted. The scribe had a vital role in shaping the kingdom's future, as their words carried weight, but there was a level of personal risk involved. Scribes were often privy to the king's most confidential affairs. They were the ones who recorded political intrigues, court scandals, and the private thoughts of royalty. The scribe's role in shaping history was often more subtle, but just as impactful. One wrong word or misinterpreted order could cause immense harm to the kingdom or to the people who lived within it. You begin to think of the weight of the scribe's pen, how a few words could change the course of history. Imagine being the one to write the official letters of war or peace. Imagine being the one who wrote the laws that governed the kingdom. These documents would be preserved for centuries long after the scribe had passed. It was a job that came with a certain burden, the responsibility to record history accurately and with care, for future generations would depend on their records. Historians still debate how much the scribes truly influenced the royal court. Were they mere record keepers, or did they subtly shape the direction of the kingdom by choosing which events were documented? It's hard to say for sure, but the fact remains that the scribe held immense power, the ability to immortalise the kingdom's history in ink. As you walk back toward the castle's main entrance, the realisation settles in that these strange, often overlooked jobs played a much larger role in shaping the medieval world than we might have imagined. The king's scribe, the night watchman, the food taster, and even the gong farmer, each one, though different, was essential in keeping the kingdom running. There's a strange comfort in that thought, isn't there? That even in the most mundane or difficult roles, these workers made their mark on history. It wasn't always glamorous or glorious, and it wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. Every role, no matter how small or strange, helped to shape the medieval world as we know it. And as you turn the corner of the castle, the night settles in around you, and you realise that these workers were the unsung heroes of their time. The night has fully descended now, and the castle grounds are cloaked in a serene, almost sacred quiet. The only sounds are the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees, and the soft murmur of distant conversations as servants finish their nightly tasks. The moonlight bathes the entire courtyard in a soft, silvery glow, casting long shadows across the stone paths and the ancient walls of the castle. The night feels timeless, as if you're standing at the crossroads between history and memory, and the weight of the medieval world lingers all around you. As you stroll slowly through the now still grounds, your thoughts turn once more to the strange and often overlooked professions that sustained this medieval world, those odd jobs that ensured the kingdom functioned, even if they didn't make it into the history books. The gong farmers and the rat catchers may not have been celebrated, but without them, the kingdom would have fallen into disorder, its streets overrun with waste and disease. Similarly, the night watchmen, with their lonely patrols and keen awareness of every shadow, ensured the safety of the kingdom during the dark hours. But there is still one more occupation, one that holds a particularly odd charm and an even odder necessity, the job of the professional bird scarer. Yes, it sounds strange, but in medieval times this role was critical to ensuring that the kingdom's crops remained safe. The bird scarer was exactly what you'd imagine, a person who used various methods to keep birds from eating crops. But this wasn't simply about chasing birds away, it was a delicate art of making the land inhospitable to these feathered thieves, without causing permanent damage to the farm itself. You can picture the bird scarer now, walking the fields early in the morning armed with a whip or perhaps a noisy rattle, scaring away the crows, pigeons and other birds that would feast on the newly planted crops. The problem wasn't just the number of birds, it was that these creatures could ruin entire harvests if left unchecked. In a time when food was already scarce, and crop failure could mean starvation, the bird scarer had a heavy responsibility. But the job didn't just involve making noise, the bird scarer had to be clever. Often, they would create decoy birds or scarecrows to ward off flocks from the crops. Some bird scarers even employed dogs trained to chase the birds, while others might make loud sounds using simple instruments like rattles or bells. These professionals had to be on constant watch, ensuring that the birds did not settle in for too long. One could imagine the frustration of working in the fields day after day, facing the same battle with the birds over and over. The weather would shift, the seasons would change, and yet the bird scarer's task remained the same, keeping the fields safe and ensuring that the harvest wouldn't be lost to the relentless pecking of crows. Interestingly, historians still wonder about the methods these bird scarers used and how effective they really were. While we know they were a crucial part of medieval life, did their methods actually work, or were they merely a symbolic presence, a comforting sight for farmers who worried about the harvest? Some have speculated that the role of the bird scarer might have been more about tradition than actual effectiveness. The idea of someone watching over the crops with their simple tools and their constant vigilance may have been more important than the actual physical act of scaring birds away. As you reflect on this, you realise how much these seemingly strange and minor professions were woven into the fabric of everyday life. Even the role of the bird scarer, which might seem laughable today, played an essential part in the survival of the medieval economy. Without the careful attention of these workers, the kingdom's food supply would have been more precarious, and the delicate balance between survival and hunger would have tilted in favour of disaster. And then, of course, there was the job of cleaning the royal bedchamber, an essential, albeit unglamorous role in maintaining the privacy and dignity of the royal family. The personal chambermaids tasked with cleaning up after the king or queen's private activities were responsible not just for tidying up but also for maintaining the decorum of the court. The royal bedchamber was often the scene of political intrigues, private conversations and deeply personal moments. For the chambermaids, their role went beyond just cleaning up. They were often the silent witnesses to the most private aspects of the monarch's life. Imagine being one of these chambermaids, quietly slipping into the bedchamber to tidy up after the royal couple's night, knowing that the very whispers of the day's events could find their way into the ears of those with political power. The chambermaids, in many ways, were the true silent influences of the court. They knew things, secrets, gossip, matters of state that could change the course of history. They held the kingdom's secrets in their hands. The importance of their work, though largely unacknowledged, was immense. Historians still wonder how much these women were trusted or how much influence they had. Were they just servants, or were they more akin to informants, the quiet eyes and ears that shaped the very policies of the court? It's a question that remains unanswered, but one thing is certain. Without the chambermaids, without the caretakers of royal privacy, the kingdom would have felt far less secure. As you make your way back through the castle, the quiet weight of the past lingers in the still night air. The castle's walls, sturdy and unyielding, seem to hold the echoes of these strange, often unappreciated roles, jobs that made the world turn even if they didn't make it into the grand stories told by the historians. The herb gatherer, the gong farmer, the night watchman, the tomb cleaner and the food taster, each one, whether out of necessity or tradition, played their part in keeping the medieval world from falling apart. The jobs we remember today, the noble knights and famous kings, were only one side of the story. The real heart of the kingdom beat in the hands of these quieter, more humble workers who shaped history from behind the scenes. They may not have sought glory, but they were the ones who kept the kingdom alive, ensuring that it flourished day by day in ways that most of us will never truly understand. And as the night fades into the early hours of morning, the castle stands quietly, waiting for the next chapter in history to be written. The workers of the past, from the most honoured to the most overlooked, still remain part of the fabric of this place, shaping it, protecting it, and ensuring its survival through their strange, necessary work. As you continue your journey through the castle grounds, the sun has started to rise, casting soft golden hues across the stone walls. A gentle breeze stirs the air, carrying with it the fresh scent of morning dew. There's something inherently peaceful about the morning hours, when the world still seems to be stretching and waking up. As you walk along the stone path, you can hear the faint sounds of activity from the servants preparing for the day ahead. But it's the stillness, the calm before the castle fully comes to life that makes you stop for a moment, taking in the serenity of the medieval world. One job that was vital yet often overlooked in this early morning bustle was that of the sheep dung gatherer. The role sounds strange, doesn't it? But in a time before modern waste disposal, animal waste played an important role in keeping things running, especially in rural and agricultural societies. The sheep dung gatherer's job wasn't glamorous, but it was absolutely essential to maintaining the health of the kingdom's farmlands. In the early morning, when the farmers and shepherds were busy with the livestock, the dung gatherers would begin their rounds. With their baskets or carts in hand, they would head to the fields where sheep had grazed. Their task was to collect the droppings left behind by the flocks, ensuring that they weren't wasted. Yes, it may sound unpleasant, but sheep dung, like other types of animal waste, was an incredibly valuable resource. In fact, it was often used as fertilizer, helping to enrich the soil for future crops. But there was another side to this strange job. Sheep dung also played a role in the medicinal practices of the time. In some cases, it was believed that sheep droppings could be used in healing balms and potions. So not only was the dung valuable for farming, but it also found its way into the apothecary's shop, where it was used for a variety of remedies. Historians still wonder about the importance of dung in medieval life. Was it really as critical as it seems, or was it more symbolic of a time when nothing could be wasted? Some argue that the use of animal waste was rooted in practicality and necessity, while others believe it carried spiritual significance, representing a kind of connection to the land. Either way, the dung gatherers were essential workers, even if their role was a dirty one. Without them, the kingdom's agriculture would have suffered, and its healing remedies would have been less potent. As you continue through the castle, with the morning sun slowly creeping higher in the sky, you can't help but marvel at how such unremarkable jobs were crucial to the survival of the medieval world. It wasn't just about the highborn knights or the noble ladies, it was the workers in the shadows, those who performed the dirty work, that kept the kingdom running. The day is now fully upon you, and with it comes the quiet rhythm of the castle awakening. But even as the castle comes to life, the strange jobs continue to unfold around you. It's a hidden world, one where every role, no matter how small, had a part to play in the grand scheme of things. And just as you are about to continue your walk, another peculiar job comes to mind: the gong farmer's apprentice. The gong farmer's apprentice was an interesting and somewhat unusual role in medieval society. While the senior gong farmers were tasked with the unenviable job of clearing the cesspits, the apprentices had to learn the trade by working closely with them. These apprentices had to become familiar with the technical aspects of waste removal, but they also had to get used to working in the unpleasant conditions that came with the job. In many ways, the gong farmer's apprentice had an even tougher role than the farmer themselves. It wasn't just about being exposed to the physical mess and filth. It was also about developing a sense of practicality and knowing exactly what had to be done to keep the town running smoothly. The apprentice had to understand the delicate balance between collecting waste and ensuring that it was disposed of without contaminating nearby areas or water sources. There was, of course, the danger of disease. In the absence of modern sanitation systems, human waste could easily become a breeding ground for illness. The apprentices had to be particularly vigilant, making sure that they didn't cause any harm to themselves or the rest of the community while learning the ropes of waste management. Historians are still curious about how much the apprentices truly understood the gravity of their task. Did they learn through experience, or were their teachings passed down from the more experienced gong farmers? Like most apprenticeships in medieval times, the gong farmer's apprentice worked long hours, typically starting before dawn and finishing after dusk. They were often invisible workers, much like their masters. Most townspeople didn't pay much attention to the apprentices, but without them, the essential work of the kingdom would have faltered. These apprentices were the ones who would ensure that the waste removal process continued to function year after year. Historians still debate whether the apprenticeship system was truly fair. In some ways, it could have been a harsh life for the young apprentices, exposed to the worst of the medieval world. But in another sense, it was a necessary life, one that ensured the survival of the community. The work, while grim, was vital, and it provided the kingdom with the means to stay clean, healthy, and safe. As you stand outside the castle's great hall, the light now fully illuminating the grounds, you realise how many of these strange jobs were interconnected. The apprentices, with their tough training, were just another piece in the puzzle of medieval society. Their work may have been invisible, but it was anything but unimportant. As you turn a corner, the quiet atmosphere of the castle grounds gives way to a more vibrant space, a bustling marketplace filled with the fragrance of freshly baked bread, herbs, and the sharp tang of fruit. The marketplace was, as you might expect, a hub of activity, where the livelihoods of countless tradesmen and labourers were on full display. But amid the noise and commotion, there was one role that stood apart from all others: the pursemaker. The pursemaker, also known as a money pouch maker, had an unusual yet crucial place in medieval society. The job wasn't as glamorous as the life of a silk merchant, but it was vital to the economy. In a world without the luxury of credit cards or digital payments, the pursemaker was the one who crafted the very tools by which people exchanged wealth. A purse was not simply a bag. It was a statement, a piece of personal identity, and a safeguard for one's savings. Pursemakers had to master the art of craftsmanship, using leather, fabric, and sometimes even precious metals to create a durable, functional, and attractive purse. Their work was both practical and artistic, as they often embroidered, decorated, or embossed the pouches with unique designs to suit the tastes of their noble clients. But it wasn't just about making something that looked nice. These purses had to be secure. They had to protect the valuable coins and jewels that would be carried by the owner. You can imagine the bustling workshop of the pursemaker, leather scraps strewn about, the rhythmic sound of a needle stitching leather, and the warm glow of candles illuminating intricate designs. The pursemaker's tools were simple but effective: needles, thread, and leather, with a steady hand that could craft a piece that would last for years. And yet, despite the precision involved in their work, pursemakers were not always regarded as highly as their craft would suggest. The job was often associated with humble labour, even though it was essential to the functioning of medieval commerce. Historians still speculate about the pursemaker's role. Were they merely craftsmen, or did they play a larger role in the trade of goods? Were their pouches simply accessories, or did they serve as symbols of status and security? The answer is likely a combination of both, with pursemakers fulfilling a functional role while also contributing to the economy's overall health. The morning sun has fully risen, casting a warm golden glow over the castle grounds. The soft rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird provide a gentle soundtrack to the day's beginning. The castle, now buzzing with the early stirrings of activity, feels alive in a way that mirrors the medieval world itself, both full of life and yet quietly bustling behind the scenes. As you continue your walk, the path takes you past the garden and toward a large open courtyard where yet another medieval job was carried out: the public executioner. Now, before you assume this role is just grim and morbid, take a moment to consider its importance. The public executioner was not just a person carrying out sentences, they were part of the justice system. Yes, their work was rooted in death and punishment, but it also served a larger purpose: maintaining order, ensuring that laws were followed, and providing a public deterrent to crime. In many ways, the executioner's work wasn't just about ending a life, it was about reminding the people of the consequences of their actions. This was a highly specialised role, one that required a certain precision and unflinching resolve. An executioner wasn't just swinging an axe or drawing a sword, they had to carry out their duties with a level of efficiency and sensitivity to the circumstances. The people who filled this role were often seen as both feared and reviled. Their work looked down upon by the general public, but still seen as necessary for upholding law and order. Imagine the tension in the air on the day of an execution. The townsfolk would gather, lining the streets to witness the event. Some would view it as a necessary part of justice, while others might see it as a grim spectacle to be avoided. As the executioner, you wouldn't just have to face the emotional toll of your job, you'd also have to carry the weight of public perception. You were the one who ended a life, regardless of whether you were emotionally invested in the proceedings. You had to be detached from the situation to do your job properly. Historians still debate the personal life of the executioner. Were they haunted by the work they did? Was it a job they took because there were no other options? Or did they believe in the need for punishment in maintaining order? Some executioners were skilled with a variety of instruments, from swords to axes to the noose, each tool requiring different forms of expertise. Their precision wasn't just about avoiding mistakes, it was about ensuring that the sentence was carried out quickly and without unnecessary suffering. There's something oddly sympathetic about the executioner's job when you think about it. They were not cruel as much as their job might suggest. They were simply carrying out what was considered a necessary evil. Perhaps it was the distaste for the job that led to the isolation that executioners often experienced. Many were kept at the edges of society, distanced from the rest of the community. Historians wonder if any executioners ever grew to question the morality of their work, or if they saw it as a duty above all else. One thing is certain, though. Without them, the medieval justice system would have lacked the teeth needed to maintain order. As you think about the executioner, you're reminded of just how many strange, vital jobs were part of the medieval world. While some jobs may seem macabre or unpleasant, they were essential to the structure and functioning of society. The executioner, the jailer, the tax collector, each one was necessary for the kingdom's continuation, and in the eyes of many their work was a grim necessity, even if it brought them no glory. Leaving the courtyard behind, you make your way through the main hall, the cool, ancient stone beneath your feet a reminder of the timelessness of the castle. The walls, filled with tapestries depicting royal victories, provide a solemn backdrop to your thoughts. The medieval world, in all its quirks and strangeness, was full of jobs that served vital purposes. But now, as you near the royal kitchens, another role catches your attention, one that might sound more domestic but was still an integral part of the medieval household. This job wasn't as grim as the executioner's, nor as lonely as the night watchman's, but it was just as necessary. The head cook, often the most skilled member of the kitchen staff, was responsible not only for preparing the daily meals for the royal family, but also for maintaining the dignity of the kingdom's cuisine. The head cook's job was no small feat. It required not just culinary expertise, but a deep understanding of medieval ingredients, knowledge of medicinal herbs, and the ability to create dishes that were fit for a king. But the head cook didn't just oversee the day-to-day preparation of meals. They were also tasked with organising banquets, elaborate affairs that could stretch on for hours, sometimes days filled with music, dancing, and an endless array of courses. Imagine standing in the royal kitchens, the smell of roasting meats, spices, and freshly baked bread filling the air. The head cook had to balance the demands of the royal court, ensuring that every dish was flawless and that no guest went without. Historians still wonder how much freedom the head cook actually had. Did they have complete autonomy in their kitchen, or were they constantly overruled by the taste of the monarch or their advisors? Did the king or queen dictate every dish, or were the head cook's own innovations celebrated? One thing is clear though, the head cook was often a trusted individual, skilled in their craft and highly respected by their staff. If the kitchen staff was a well-oiled machine, it was the head cook who held the gears together, directing their actions and ensuring that the meals that emerged from the kitchens were fit for royalty. The job of the head cook, while seemingly mundane, was one of the most important roles in the royal household. A bad meal could ruin a banquet, embarrass the royal family, and even spark political unrest. And in a world where food was the centre of so much social life, from feasts to private gatherings, the role of the cook was absolutely vital. Behind the closed doors of the kitchens, the head cook had more influence over the mood of the kingdom than anyone could have realised. As you step out into the fresh air, the light of the day fully illuminating the castle grounds, you find yourself reflecting on the vast array of strange but essential jobs that once filled the medieval world. From the work of the gong farmers to the quiet diligence of the herb gatherers, the medieval world was built on the backs of workers who performed crucial roles, often unnoticed, but always necessary. The afternoon sun casts its warm golden light across the castle's outer courtyard as you continue your walk. You pass by the open gates, watching the servants hustle about, preparing for the evening feast. The atmosphere is lighter now, filled with the hustle of the day's activities, but in the back of your mind, the strange jobs of the medieval world still linger. These roles, though often overlooked, were the unseen forces that kept the wheels of society turning. And as you walk deeper into the castle's heart, another role comes to mind, the medieval tanner. The tanner worked tirelessly to transform raw animal hides into usable leather. While today we take leather goods for granted, whether in shoes, bags or jackets, the tanner's work in the medieval period was a critical part of daily life. Every piece of leather, whether it was for a knight's armour, a peasant's shoes or the furnishings in the royal court, began with the work of the tanner. Imagine the stench that must have filled the air in the tanning pits. The process was far from pleasant, involving soaking the hides in various solutions to soften them, then scraping away the flesh and hair before they were treated with oils and preservatives. The smell of rotting flesh, urine and animal fats would have been overwhelming. Yet without the tanner's skill, leather goods would have been unavailable, and the daily needs of the kingdom would have been impossible to meet. The work of the tanner wasn't easy. It required both physical strength and a keen understanding of materials and techniques. The tanner would have spent hours in the pits, carefully overseeing each stage of the process. They had to know just how long to soak the hides, the right way to treat the leather, and the secret techniques for making the finest quality leather products. A tanner's reputation often rested on the quality of their leather, and the best tanners were highly valued by both commoners and nobility alike. Interestingly, tanners also had a certain social status in medieval society. While they weren't among the elite, they were considered a necessary trade, and their work was respected, even if their craft was dirty and unpleasant. In fact, some historians argue that the tanner's role was one of the most indispensable, as leather was used for everything from armour to clothing to tools. Historians still wonder just how many tanning techniques were passed down over generations. Was the knowledge of leatherworking a closely guarded secret, shared only between master and apprentice? And how much of the process involved trial and error, learning from mistakes to improve the craft? One thing is clear though, the work of the tanner was an essential part of medieval life, and without it many aspects of society would have faltered. As you move on through the courtyard, the thoughts of tanners and their craftsmanship settle into the back of your mind. You continue your journey deeper into the castle, reflecting on the way these strange, often overlooked jobs built the medieval world. As you walk deeper into the castle, you pass the bustling kitchen, where a group of servants are busy chopping vegetables and preparing ingredients for the evening feast. The smell of freshly baked bread fills the air, but your mind is still occupied by the world of peculiar medieval jobs. One job in particular catches your attention, the role of the jailer. This role, while associated with punishment and confinement, played an important part in maintaining law and order in the medieval world. The jailer's job wasn't glamorous, but it was crucial. Jails in medieval times were far from the modern institutions we think of today. These were often dark, damp and cold places where prisoners were kept in simple cells made of stone or wood. The jailer's responsibility was to manage the prisoners, ensure their confinement, and occasionally help maintain the security of the prison itself. A jailer's work was often done in isolation. They were responsible for ensuring that the keys to the cells were secure, that the prisoners were kept from escaping, and that any punishments ordered by the court were carried out. Depending on the location and the severity of the crimes, the jailer could have a range of responsibilities. Some jailers were required to interrogate prisoners, while others simply provided food and water to those locked away. But the jailer's job was more than just keeping prisoners behind bars. In a time when justice was often a matter of personal judgment rather than codified law, the jailer could be seen as a figure of authority. Their role was often misunderstood, seen as brutish and harsh, but in reality it required a certain level of responsibility and discretion. Historians still wonder about the relationship between the jailer and their prisoners. Were the jailers simply following orders, or did they have the power to decide the fate of those in their care? Were they respected by the community, or were they seen as no more than enforcers of the law? As you continue your walk, you can't help but think about the moral weight that came with the job of the jailer. In a world where justice was often arbitrary, the jailer's role wasn't just about prison management. It was about maintaining the delicate balance between law, order, and personal morality. As you near the castle's central courtyard, your attention shifts to the humble cobbler, another crucial but often overlooked role in medieval society. In a time when people walked everywhere, no horses, no cars, no bicycles, the need for quality shoes was immense. The cobbler's job, though often considered a simple trade, was vital for both comfort and survival. Cobblers weren't just responsible for making shoes, they were also responsible for repairing and maintaining them. People in medieval times would have relied on their cobblers to provide sturdy, functional footwear, as a single pair of shoes could last for years with proper care. And because shoes were so essential to daily life, cobblers held an important place in their communities. They were responsible for creating shoes that fit well, were durable and could withstand the wear and tear of daily life. Cobblers were skilled craftsmen, capable of using leather, wood and other materials to create shoes that suited the needs of various social classes. A nobleman's shoes would be elaborate, possibly adorned with precious gems or decorated with intricate stitching, while a peasant's shoes would be simple and functional, built to withstand long days of work in the fields. But cobblers didn't just make shoes for people, they also worked with leather to create boots for soldiers, moccasins for travellers, and even slippers for the wealthy. Their craft was as diverse as the people they served, and their work was indispensable. Without a cobbler, society would have been left with blisters, sore feet, and a lack of functionality in footwear. In many ways, the cobbler's work wasn't just about making shoes, it was about ensuring that people could move through their world with comfort and safety. Historians are still fascinated by the role of the cobbler in medieval society. Were they seen as skilled artisans or simply labourers who performed a necessary but humble task? The answer is likely somewhere in between. Cobblers were often well respected for their craftsmanship, but their work was never viewed as glamorous. They were, however, integral to the functioning of society, ensuring that the population could continue to move forward one step at a time. The day's warmth is fading as the sun sets behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the castle grounds. The evening air is cool now, and the hum of activity in the castle quiets as the workers finish their daily tasks. You find yourself in the castle's inner courtyard, taking a moment to reflect on the strange jobs you've uncovered. Each one, from the royal taster to the humble cobbler, played its part in the vast, intricate system that was medieval society. It's easy to imagine that those in noble positions had the most power, but as you've seen, the roles that seemed unnoticed or invisible were often just as crucial. One job that often goes unnoticed in medieval society, but was essential to the workings of any castle, was that of the castle laundress. This may seem like a mundane job at first glance, but it was vital to maintaining the cleanliness of the royal household. The laundress wasn't just responsible for washing the king's or queen's clothes, she was responsible for the entire castle's linen, from bedsheets to the clothes worn by servants and nobles alike. Laundresses worked tirelessly to scrub out stains, wash bedding, and refresh the heavy woolen garments that were worn year-round. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer physical labour involved in this role. The laundry process didn't involve the luxury of modern machines. Everything had to be washed by hand. The laundress would spend long hours at the wash basins, scrubbing clothes in cold water, often with harsh soap and river water, and dealing with the countless dirt stains that built up over time. But there was more to the job than just washing. The laundress had to carefully preserve the fabrics, some of which were rich, expensive and delicate, while others were used for practical everyday purposes. The garments had to be properly cared for, since many pieces of clothing had to last for months, if not years. Linen was often reused and passed down through generations, so it was important to maintain its integrity. There were dangers to this work as well. The laundresses were constantly exposed to chemicals, harsh soaps, and hot water, which could cause skin irritations and injuries. And the work itself could be backbreaking, bending over wash basins all day, scrubbing and washing without rest. Yet, despite the physical toll, laundresses were often viewed as low-ranking members of society, their work deemed unimportant by the noble classes they served. Historians still question how much recognition laundresses received for the immense amount of labour they put in. Were they seen as essential workers, or were they just another forgotten group? What is clear, though, is that the role of the laundress was vital in keeping the kingdom functioning. If the noble family couldn't rely on clean, well-maintained clothing, they would lose their status. This simple, often overlooked job helped to maintain the social order. No one could afford to wear dirty or unkempt clothing, and the laundress ensured the kingdom's appearance remained pristine. The castle is now bathed in the soft light of evening, and as you pass through the courtyard, the world outside seems to grow distant. The sounds of the servants finishing their chores and the laughter of guests at the banquet fade into the background as your mind continues to turn over the many strange roles that kept the medieval world in motion. And as you enter a new part of the castle, your thoughts turn to yet another peculiar occupation, the castle messenger. At first glance, the messenger's role might not seem all that important. After all, there were couriers and messengers in nearly every society, delivering letters and news. But in medieval times, the castle messenger was far more than just a postman. They were the lifeblood of communication within the castle, between lords, and even across kingdoms. The job of the castle messenger was not just about delivering a letter from point A to point B. It involved carrying sensitive news that could impact everything from war to diplomacy. A messenger could find themselves carrying important letters from the king to a foreign monarch, or they could be tasked with delivering orders to soldiers on the front lines. The speed at which the messenger delivered these messages could change the course of battles or entire wars. It wasn't just about the words in the letter, it was about the timing and the urgency of the message. But it wasn't all about dramatic missions. The messenger also carried letters for the noble families, serving as their lifeline to the outside world. Imagine the messenger riding through the rain or across rough terrain, carrying news that could mean life or death for the kingdom. The messenger had to be quick, resourceful, and always ready for the unexpected. The physical toll on the messenger was often significant. The medieval world lacked the modern comforts we take for granted. There were no paved roads, no motors to carry the messenger, and no GPS to guide them. Every journey was filled with uncertainty, as messengers had to navigate dangerous landscapes and often unfamiliar territory. But despite the hardships, messengers were essential to the functioning of the kingdom. They were the ones who kept the flow of information moving, ensuring that important news reached its destination. Historians still marvel at how these messengers managed to traverse vast distances with little more than their wits, their horses, and a keen sense of direction. They were among the most trustworthy and valued members of the court. Without them, the noble families, the king, and even the commoners would have been cut off from the world around them. The messenger's role may have seemed simple, but it was anything but. As the light dims and the sounds of the banquet reach your ears once more, you realise how much the medieval world depended on these quiet, unassuming workers. The messenger, the tanner, the laundress. They weren't the ones who made history, but they were the ones who sustained it. Without them, the kingdom wouldn't have functioned. You pause for a moment, standing on the balcony, gazing out at the distant hills, the soft breeze ruffling your hair. The medieval world, with all its strangeness and necessity, was built on these peculiar roles. Each job, no matter how odd, played a part in making sure life in the kingdom could continue. And as the night deepens, you are reminded that in a world of knights and kings, there were those who worked tirelessly in the background, quiet, unseen, but indispensable to the world they served. Sweet dreams.